The story begins not with steel and rivets, but with a humiliation. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles shackled Germany's navy to coastal duties and small dreams. 2 decades later, Adolf Hitler promised to cut those shackles and restore a fleet worthy of a great power. In shipyards along the North and Baltic Seas, planners whispered of a new generation of capital ships, sleek, fast, heavily armored leviathans that would erase the memory of scuttled hulls at Scapa Flow. Among them, one would become an emblem, feared, hunted, mythologized. Her name was Bismarck.
She was conceived in a climate of deception and ambition. Publicly, Berlin professed compliance with international limits. Privately, it pushed past them. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935 offered just enough legal cover to mask far grander intentions. And under the broad banner of Plan Z, draftsmen worked late into winter evenings transforming paper into power. At Bloemenvoss in Hamburg, the keel went down in secretive ceremony. Welders' torches traced hot signatures along plates as a forest of scaffolding rose around a bare spine that would carry nearly 50,000 tons of armor, ammunition, and the Reich's maritime hopes. Designers faced a paradox: build a ship that could outrun what it couldn't outgun, and outgun what it couldn't outrun. The result was a silhouette both elegant and formidable, a flared Atlantic bow to shed heavy seas, a high freeboard for seaworthiness, and a superstructure rising in layered platforms like a steel ziggurat. Inside, Bismarck's body was a fortress, a citadel wrapped in face-hardened armor, a belt thick enough to shrug off medium-range hits, and an internal turtleback scheme, sloped protective decks and bulkheads meant to keep shells from ravaging the heart of the ship. It was a quintessentially German compromise: extraordinary protection against close to mid-range fire, less ideal against the plunging arcs of long-range shells. But Bismarck's designers intended to choose the range, not suffer it.
The muscle of the ship lay in 8 380mm or 15-inch guns mounted in 4 twin turrets, fore and aft, each the size of a small house. In the rehearsed ballet of combat, these would be the ballerinas. Swiveling with surprising grace, elevation gears singing, breeches yawning to accept shells that weighed as much as a grand piano, then exhaling fire that rippled across the sea like shockwaves. Her secondary battery, crisp, dual-purpose guns ready to sweep the sky or rake a destroyer, backed by a thicket of lighter anti-aircraft weapons, offered layers of defense in a world where the bomber's shadow grew longer by the month. Yet power without eyes is blind. Bismarck carried some of the most advanced fire control instruments in Europe. High towers crowned with stereoscopic rangefinders, calculating machines that digested sightings into firing solutions in seconds, and early surface search radar, SeaTac, peering beyond fog and darkness. On her quarterdeck, a catapult could fling Arado R-196 float planes into the wind. They would circle, scout, and report, sketching the horizon with radioed lines of bearing and distance. She was not merely a brawler, she was a hunter designed to find and hit first.
Below decks, the ship was a city, complete with workshops, bakery, infirmary, and chaplain's nook. Steam turbines, fed by oil-fired boilers, promised speed above 30 knots. Astonishing for such size, driving her through Atlantic rollers with a long, confident stride. And everywhere, the German penchant for compartmentalization, watertight doors, transit routes, color-coded piping, each system labeled and cross-referenced, order imposed on potential chaos. But hardware tells only half the tale. Bismarck was also built of ideas, some prophetic, some outdated. She was intended to challenge British sea power not in a Trafalgar-style line of battle, but in the deep ocean's trade routes. Disguised as a commerce raider with the heart of a battleship, she would punch holes in the arteries of empire, forcing the Royal Navy to scatter its strength across the breadth of the Atlantic. The very existence of Bismarck would create a strategic dilemma: hunt the wolf and expose the flock, or guard the flock and let the wolf roam.
The ship's birth captured a country's imagination. When she slid down the ways on a February day in 1939, champagne broke and bands played. Admirals saluted and party officials basked in reflected glory. She bore a name heavy with national resonance: Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, the man who'd once unified Germany with blood and iron. Now that legacy gleamed again in gray paint and white wake. As the last scaffolds fell away, the practical work of turning a hull into a weapon began. Crews arrived, young men with peacetime training and wartime futures, stokers whose hands would be black with fuel oil, signalmen who'd speak in flags and flashes, gunners who would learn the rhythm of salvo and spread. They found a ship as demanding as she was majestic. The corridors were long, the routines exacting. Even at anchor, Bismarck strained at her lines like a thoroughbred eager for the race.
Sea trials in the Baltic revealed both brilliance and quirks. She was fast and responsive, steady in a swell, her batteries accurate and devastating. Yet the weight of her armor, the complexity of her systems, demanded a crew drilled to instinct. Reports were written, defects remedied, improvements made. More anti-aircraft guns, refined radar sets, a tightening of procedures that would shave seconds off the tempo of battle. Each day, the ship became less a collection of parts and more a single, living organism. By the autumn of 1940, the organism had a mind, a commander in the mold of an aristocratic professional, Ernst Lindman, and a task group leader in the calculating Gunther Lütjens, an admiral who weighed risks as carefully as he counted ships. Behind them, planners conjured code names, Rhine-Üben, the Rhine exercise, and traced possible tracks across the North Atlantic. The goal was clear: slip the British watch, smash into the shipping lanes, and inflict a political and economic blow that would echo from London to Washington.
In the dockyards, painters freshened the hull, mechanics tuned turbines, stores came aboard, infinite details before a finite voyage. The Reich's proudest warship stood ready, her brass polished, her guns dark and patient, her crew restless in the long prelude. Within months, Europe would whisper her name with awe and fear. Within weeks, the Royal Navy would answer with everything it had. On a gray Baltic morning, lines would be cast off, propellers would churn, and Bismarck would point her bow toward destiny, straight into waters where history waited with open arms and clenched fists.
When Bismarck finally stirred from her Baltic cradle, it was not with the fanfare of her launching, but with the tense quiet of secrecy. Germany's Kriegsmarine knew well that each movement of its prized warship would draw the Royal Navy's gaze. The Allies had long feared a breakout, and in those first months of 1941, their Atlantic convoys were already bleeding under the bite of U-boats. To unleash Bismarck into those waters was to add a shark among the wolves. The crew, more than 2,200 men, had spent months adjusting to life aboard. Bismarck was no gentle home. She was a machine of war. And within her steel corridors, daily routine followed a rhythm as relentless as the sea. At dawn, hammocks were stowed, decks scrubbed, and the air filled with the acrid tang of polish and oil. Mess tables doubled as bunks, so each man's space was claimed and reclaimed by shifts of comrades. Below decks, heat radiated from the boiler rooms, the roar of turbines a constant reminder that the ship was alive. Above, on windswept gun decks, sailors drilled endlessly, loading, traversing, elevating, repeating until muscle memory replaced hesitation.
Morale was complex, part pride, part unease. Few in the Kriegsmarine doubted the magnificence of their ship. Her very presence inspired awe. Yet the men also knew the odds. Britain's navy still dwarfed Germany's, and the Atlantic stretched vast and unforgiving. Rumors whispered through the mess halls about British aircraft carriers, about radar, about the fate of Graf Spee at the River Plate. But discipline held them firm.
Officers drilled their divisions, petty officers barked corrections, and chaplains spoke of duty. For many, service aboard Bismarck was the pinnacle of a naval career. For some, it would be its end. In May 1941, the order came, Operation Rheinübung. Bismarck, under Admiral Gunther Lütjens, would break into the Atlantic alongside the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. Their mission: disrupt Britain's lifeline, the convoys bringing food, oil, and weapons across the ocean. If successful, they would not just sink ships, but threaten Britain's very survival. The departure itself was a silent ballet. On the evening of May 19, 1941, under a lowering Baltic sky, Bismarck cast off from Gotenhofen, today Gdynia, Poland. Crowds of dockworkers and families stood at the quayside, waving, saluting, some weeping. For most, it was the last glimpse of their sons, brothers, or husbands. On board, Lindemann and Lütjens stood side by side, their profiles stark against the bridge windows. The ship's band played a march as the gray hull slid into deeper waters, and soon the shore melted into the mist. At sea, atmosphere tightened. The crew's world became drills and alerts, endless watches in turrets, engine rooms, radar huts, and mess holes. Men whispered of the task ahead, while officers scanned horizons for shadows. On the bridge, the new SeaTac radar gave Bismarck eyes in the fog, but also brought unease. Its operators knew that the British had radar too. Every signal, every blip, could mean hunters closing in.
Crossing the Kattegat and skirting the Norwegian coast, Bismarck rendezvoused with Prince Eugen at Korsfjord near Bergen. There, camouflage paint was altered, supplies topped up, and reports received. British patrols were already restless. In the fjord, locals glimpsed the giant silhouette against snow-dusted mountains, a glimpse that would soon make its way to Allied intelligence. By the time Bismarck steamed north into the Norwegian Sea, she was no longer a phantom. She was a marked quarry. For the men aboard, the Atlantic loomed like an iron curtain. Salt spray lashed the decks, and the endless gray horizon stretched to infinity. The gunners, eager yet anxious, polished their weapons until they gleamed, while stokers below sweated in the blast furnace of boilers that drove the ship at a steady 27 knots. In the wardroom, officers murmured over maps and intelligence reports, voices low but edged with urgency. Everyone knew, if the Royal Navy found them, there would be no half measures. Then, on May 23rd, at the edge of the Denmark Strait, the moment came. Out of the mist, the lookout sighted smoke, plumes on the horizon that did not belong to merchantmen. Bismarck's crew rushed to stations, alarm bells clamoring, boots pounding steel decks, hatches slamming shut.
Crossing the Kattegat and skirting the Norwegian coast, Bismarck rendezvoused with Prince Eugen at Korsfjord near Bergen. There, camouflage paint was altered, supplies topped up, and reports received. British patrols were already restless. In the fjord, locals glimpsed the giant's silhouette against snow-dusted mountains, a glimpse that would soon make its way to Allied intelligence. By the time Bismarck steamed north into the Norwegian Sea, she was no longer a phantom, she was a marked quarry. For the men aboard, the Atlantic loomed like an iron curtain. Salt spray lashed the decks, and the endless gray horizon stretched to infinity. The gunners, eager yet anxious, polished their weapons until they gleamed, while stokers below sweated in the blast furnace of boilers that drove the ship at a steady 27 knots. In the wardroom, officers murmured over maps and intelligence reports, voices low but edged with urgency. Everyone knew, if the Royal Navy found them, there would be no half measures. Then, on May 23rd, at the edge of the Denmark Strait, the moment came. Out of the mist, the lookout sighted smoke, plumes on the horizon that did not belong to merchantmen. Bismarck's crew rushed to stations, alarm bells clamoring, boots pounding steel decks, hatches slamming shut. Somewhere beyond the veil of fog, the shapes of Britain's pride, the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the battleship HMS Prince of Wales, emerged.
After the thunder of the Denmark Strait, Bismarck steamed westward, wounded but unbroken. Yet the trail of oil that leaked from her ruptured tanks betrayed her like blood in the water. Admiral Lugien's mission to strike at Allied shipping was no longer possible. The Royal Navy was no longer guarding convoys, it was coming for him. For the next 4 days, the North Atlantic became a chessboard of steel. British cruisers shadowed Bismarck from a distance, never closing, always reporting. Wireless signals crackled between ships and Admiralty headquarters. Churchill himself intervened. "I don't care how you do it. You must sink the Bismarck." Bismarck's crew endured a relentless cat and mouse. By day, they scanned the gray horizon for masts and funnels. By night, they felt the vibration of depth charges hurled at imagined submarine hunters. Fatigue set in. Men slept at their battle stations, hammocks left untouched. The mess halls were quiet now, conversations hushed. Everyone knew that the entire Royal Navy was converging. On May 26th, the trap began to close. South of Ireland, the aging carrier HMS Ark Royal launched a squadron of Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, biplanes, slow and obsolete in appearance, but deadly in resolve. As dusk fell, they descended on Bismarck through sleet and spray, weaving through anti-aircraft fire that blazed from her decks. The sea around the battleship erupted in plumes and geysers as the torpedoes struck. One found its mark aft, jamming her rudder. In an instant, Bismarck's fate was sealed. She could still fight, but she could no longer flee. That night, trapped in a circle, she sailed helplessly, turning slowly, endlessly, under the indifferent stars. The crew braced for the end. Some prayed. Others wrote letters they knew would never be sent. Captain Lindman walked the decks, offering quiet words of courage. In the engine rooms, stokers fed the fires to keep turbines turning, though the ship could only spiral. At dawn on May 27th, the Royal Navy arrived in force. The battleships King George V and Rodney, accompanied by cruisers and destroyers. As the sun broke through the clouds, they opened fire. Shells rained down on Bismarck, hammering her relentlessly. Her great turrets answered, but sluggishly, some already crippled. The once proud hunter was now prey. Her guns silenced one by one, her superstructure shattered by repeated blows. Fire and smoke engulfed her decks. The slaughter lasted nearly 2 hours. By 10:30, Bismarck was a burning hulk, still afloat, but dying. Lindman gave the order to scuttle. Charges were set, seacocks opened, and below decks men rushed to flood compartments. At the same time, British torpedoes struck home. The great ship began to roll, her massive hull shuddering as water poured in. At 10:40, she capsized, stern lifting, bow plunging. With a final roar, Bismarck slipped beneath the waves, swallowed by the Atlantic's cold embrace. More than 2,000 men went down with her. Fewer than 120 survived, plucked from the freezing water by British ships before a looming U-boat threat forced them to withdraw, leaving hundreds to perish. The legend of Bismarck was forged not only in her power, but in her destruction. She had lived barely 9 days at sea as an operational warship. Yet in that brief time, she had shaken the Royal Navy to its core, destroyed its most famous ship, and drawn nearly every available British vessel into a desperate pursuit. In Germany, her loss was a blow to pride and morale, though propaganda painted her end as heroic sacrifice. In Britain, her sinking was celebrated as vengeance for Hood, a necessary triumph in a war that still hung in the balance. Strategically, her death underscored the shifting nature of naval warfare. Battleships, no matter how mighty, were increasingly vulnerable to aircraft, submarines, and the combined weight of an enemy's determination. Today, Bismarck lies 3 miles beneath the Atlantic, her hull twisted and broken, yet eerily intact in the silence of the deep. For divers and historians, she is a tomb and a monument, a reminder of both technological brilliance and human tragedy. Her name endures in books, films, and the memory of those who seek to understand the clash of steel that defined the oceans in World War II. The saga of Bismarck is more than the tale of a single ship. It is a parable of pride and peril, of innovation colliding with reality, of men who fought and died within walls of armor and fire. She rose as a symbol of might, and she fell as a warning, etched forever into the history of the sea.